Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition, episode 132. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and ARDA. And today's quote, bit of a long one. Many people think that lean is about cutting heads, reducing the workforce, or cutting inventory. Lean is really a growth strategy. It is about gaining market share and being prepared to enter in or create new markets. Ernie Smith.
I'm not exactly sure what this means, but I do feel it has some truth in it somewhere.
I think a few pieces that jump out to me. In sort of, talking to a bunch of different companies about ARDA, some of them have never heard of lean, but others have. And definitely the perception of lean is the former, right? Well, we don't like having a lot of stuff isn't really a problem for us. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's not really what we're trying to do here.
Right.
We're just trying to make sure that when your people are building things, they have the things they need.
Right.
And that will be helpful.
The main thing that comes out to me is the gaining market share.
Yeah.
And what I think about there is that I've been thinking a lot about just the fundamental sort of principle of not doing work before it's needed. Yeah. And when you do that correctly, you are much more nimble and able to respond quickly to demand. And that corresponds to gaining market share, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
As well as preparing to enter new or create new markets, because you can develop and produce quicker than your competitors, hopefully.
I think a few things at Austere, I've definitely noticed as we've systemized more and more things and reduced the struggle and setup time on different tasks, releasing new products has become easier and easier.
Yeah.
And so when someone makes a recommendation or has some cool idea of something to make, it doesn't feel as impossible to respond to it. And then what you're saying, in an early conversation with one of our technical advisors, we were sort of talking about all the savings related to lean and Kanban, et cetera. And he basically had the pushback of focusing on the reducing downside as having sort of a finite cap,
right,
versus the upside potential of the second you are confident in your production, you can make more aggressive promises and know you're going to keep them, right? You're reading Critical Chain. One of the things about Critical Chain is you don't actually want to deliver to a customer late. And so you're always going to be quoting lead times sort of so that it's not your average lead time you're going to quote. You're going to quote your 95, 98% percentile lead times. And so, in terms of getting new business, for sure, you can quote faster turnaround times, and then that's not stressing your system or charging expedite fees. Yeah. Who wouldn't want to work with you?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah.
So, it is cool. And it's interesting. We focus a lot these days on not doing work before it's needed, which I think the focus in lean on reducing inventory really kind of leads people astray. As you've said, people are we don't have a lot of stuff, or we need this stuff. And it's you might, right? It's very realistic that you might need that stuff. And the stuff is not really the issue. It's the embedded energy in the stuff.
100%.
And the time, embedded time and money in the stuff. Don't focus on the stuff. Look at the time and the energy that went into it.
Yeah. One of the examples that I was eye-opening to me, and then I mentioned it to people and they seem to get something out of it, is when I look at our machined components for a while, all the time, in fact, I always think I need to buy another machine.
All day.
And at some point, the reason I was thinking it is because we didn't have the things we needed to paint that day machined.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, anything next to that is machined represents poorly allocated time on the CNC.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, we did work ahead of time and we did it wrong. And the fact that we trapped that time into that part, as well as like company time of washing those parts and sorting them and
Sure.
inspecting them. And like, meanwhile, they're sitting there because sales hasn't kept up, let's just say. And so some of that time was probably poorly allocated.
And like we've been going over a lot, I think the last months, like buffers are critical.
Yeah.
And you can't just kick it to the curb. But I think there's sort of this middle path in there where it's like, respect your buffers and the flexibility that they give you, while simultaneously recognizing all of the energy and work that's in those buffers and how to reduce it and how to put time where it, and how to get better at making your buffers correctly sized, correctly placed,
Totally.
and effective. Because it'd be very easy to just throw buffers everywhere, right? Like that's kind of the other side of the other side of the folly, sort of, which TOC with theory of constraints kind of gets at, right? It's like, don't put buffers everywhere, just put buffers in front of your bottleneck,
Right.
until that's not your bottleneck, and then put buffer at your next, whatever your bottleneck becomes, kind of a thing, which is cool. But anyway, I don't know, that wasn't a fully formed thought, but it's easy to just kind of like fall back on all of these like reactions. And I think those are kind of the key things to keep in mind. What I've been keeping in mind lately is like, think about the energy invested, but also protect and guard your system's capacity with buffers where required.
Yeah. I think the other piece in here is, cutting lead times, reducing workforce, reducing inventory. Those are all, I would say, like symptoms of TPS, like things you can pick up or read about Toyota's approach and go like, oh, they focus on reducing inventory. But actually that is the result of the second part of this quote, where they were, they stayed focused and to this day are focused on the process of taking customers' money and delivering a vehicle and figuring out how to reduce that time, how to reduce the costs in there. And then what came out was, it turned out that reducing inventory was key, right? And not because stuff is bad, but because it hid problems, and then they couldn't improve.
Right. Like it's funny in reading about Toyota versus other car companies, like their competitors, they notoriously have like huge cash reserves comparatively, right?
Yeah, their investors hate it.
Yeah, which like they are, like you could say that they are in a better position than any other car company to be able to afford to hold inventory, right?
That's a good point. Right.
Like it is not that is not their problem.
Yeah.
And if it was beneficial to their process at this point, I'm sure they would, right? And the investment probably wouldn't be a big deal in the actual like stuff.
Right. Instead, the big deal is that suddenly the upstream process can be all over the map and no one will notice.
Yeah, it just hides issues. Yeah.
I mean,
there's also the storage and all the stuff. The storage, right? Like it's.
Oh, did we talk? I'm not sure we talked about this. Okay. So, I mentioned Amnesty Day.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So same guy, we had another call with him.
That was the IBM.
Yeah.
Return all of your hidden stuff.
Yeah. A day where you could take all your stashes out and no one would ask questions. Speaking of creating buffers to protect your process.
Yeah, totally.
So he started implementing a pull system on their production floor, and like, it wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't exactly clear what the situation was, and they were essentially building to order, which kind of gets away from production leveling.
Sure. And
that bullwhip effect was very much felt by their warehouse. Right. And so at some point they called him in and they're like, what the hell are you doing? We're getting, I forget what it was, like 40 requisition requests or requisition orders from the warehouse to the to the production floor. So from the warehouse to be like, hey, we need 5 of these, we need 10 of those, we need whatever.
From the production floor asking the warehouse
for components to do their work.
Right. Sorry, I don't understand why that number is a big deal.
So apparently, I didn't either. Apparently, they just couldn't keep up. And so when they like didn't have the manpower to go get all the stuff. And what was happening is that they would put the stuff away on like a Thursday, and then on Saturday they'd have a bunch of requests for it. And so they would have to put it away and then go get it. And so they were kind of like, he was like, well, I'm just operating normally. Like this is normal operations in that they were in a steady state, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't growing. They weren't shrinking. They were just in a steady state. And what he said was just fascinating is that they had, because no one had ever leveled not leveled the floor, but just produced to pull.
Yeah. You mean produced to a standard?
Produced to actual demand.
Okay.
They, for whatever reason, were always either in a growth condition or a shrinking condition. And in a growth condition, all the forms would say like, hey, skip putting it away in the warehouse, just deliver it to the floor.
Yeah.
And so now the people in the warehouse get something off a truck. All they have to do is deliver it to the floor.
Right.
Instead of putting it on the shelf somewhere and then retrieving it from the shelf. So this is a real example of inventory costing so much time to put stuff away and get it back out that it wasn't viable. And then in a shrinking condition, they would essentially put stuff away on the shelf and then cancel a bunch of orders. So they were receiving a lot less as well. But in a steady state, no one could handle the like put it away and then a day later go get it back out.
Oh, interesting.
Take some stuff off the pallet, deliver it, and then put it back away. And then they ran into an issue with their MRP, where their MRP automatically produced these requisition orders and sent them to the warehouse for every single order that was released to the shop floor. And so they had to like build some weird override where it would ignore the requisitions, and then it would, I forget if they manually did it or they'd essentially bundle them so that the warehouse was delivering like a week of work instead of delivering, you need 3 parts to build that computer, and then you need 15 of the same part to build this other computer. Those come in as 2 requisition orders.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's almost like they needed little bins with.
Yeah, exactly. They needed, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like a line-side supermarket where you deliver a pallet from your warehouse. Yeah. Or whatever, whatever it is.
Yeah.
A week of work. Yeah. It's like, yeah, someone came up with this solution, but it was interesting to hear the software limitations, because a lot of the people running like an MRP have no way of doing it. We've heard this a few times now that people's internal IT departments are just not capable of changing like SAP, even though it's meant to be configured to do all sorts of things.
The big guys, the big ERP, MRP, whatever.
Yeah, and then they can't spend the money, and so they're just kind of stuck doing it.
Oh, that's rough.
The way.
Yeah. It's sort of astounding how many folks across all levels of industry and not just industry, but companies that don't produce physical goods as well. The people apparently just don't read.
What do you mean like crack the books that are written about how to do this well?
Well, yeah, like this example of like
totally 100%.
Right, like you and I are talking about this. We're just like 2 dudes who like work in very, very small shops.
I know.
And like we're struggling with it, right? Like it is complicated. But you would think that someone hopefully getting paid a lot of money to consult for a very large company would take a little bit of time to work. But I think it is like the standard that's just like you have experience, you've done some good thing. I don't know exactly. Who knows?
I would say the biggest weak point of TPS is trying to convince people to try it. Because everything about it sounds wrong, pretty much. Sure. Until you get like pretty deep. And
but
then you're
even
like,
outside of TPS, just like any of this stuff, right?
But I'm saying there's a much clearer answer, an easier, lower hanging fruit as like a consultant.
Yeah.
To just be like, hey, you're like, this person is walking 10 extra steps. Let's reduce it. It's like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. Like,
my friend is in a project management course right now.
Okay.
And he's been sending me like little clips that he records from class. And it's terrible, first of all. But it's like clear that they've like they've like just scratched the surface with reading, and then they have some industry experience, and then they've just kind of like homebrewed something that now they're just like teaching to a ton of people.
Damn.
And I'm like all those people could literally just go read Critical Chain and probably get more out of that than this class that they're spending hours in per week, and I think spending a lot of money on.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, that's a tangent, but
it's
sort of mind-blowing.
It is wild. It's so crazy that this is all in books and people don't seem to read it. The other thing that's been really weird is, to your point about being in a small shop, I was not it's not exactly surprising, I guess, but it is kind of simultaneously very surprising. These huge companies have all the same problems, and instead of it being like, oh, they have bandwidth to solve them, it's actually a multiplier. They have them, but multiplied by like 1,000.
Right.
Because
and they don't have 1,000 times the bandwidth.
No, and they're just a much bigger, and so now all these problems have a much bigger like bullwhip effect as it flows through many more steps, and like everything is just more. It's not. It's been interesting. Like going into, we just had a call with a company that does $6 billion in annual sales, and they're probably going to use Arda for their internal fab shop.
Okay.
And you know, you'd think like, who am I? I mean, they probably are much more advanced.
Yeah.
And then at some point in the call, I was just like, describing problems we've run into with our shop and how we've solved them, and they're like, oh, that's very interesting. It's like, I guess. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. And it seems like maybe it's sort of, you've read the E-Myth, right?
Yeah.
Just, I think that is very pervasive, that individuals start a company and they're good at the thing that company does, and not maybe good at designing systems or running a company, and that just grows. And if they're very successful, it grows
a lot, very
quickly, and a lot more than they can handle. And and simultaneously, you can't then, like, that's great for them, right? Like they could also look at my very small affair, and go like, why are you going to tell me what to do? Bother? Like, I'll do my way, because I'm making way more money, and there's merit to that for sure. But you know, joke's on them. They're wasteful. No. I had a very funny little just example the other day. I was driving around of jumping off of our quote. Pull versus command and control in real world environment.
Okay.
Stoplights versus roundabouts.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And it's just like, I'm sure everybody has been at a stoplight with no traffic going the other way while you sit at a red light. And
that's such a good point.
The inherent waste there.
And if you don't have well balanced and there's some signal lights with, you know, sensors. Yeah. Which is,
it's a step up.
But if you don't have that, then you're essentially driving some ratio of traffic from different lanes. And if that is off for whatever reason, then you could have a big buildup on one with like,
which I mean, I'm sure we've all been there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they, you know, people have attempted to optimize it, but then you look at a roundabout, which is not perfect either, right? Like it has, I mean, I think there's just inherent constraints if you try and get a lot of cars through a small area where they have to interact with each other, right? Like people are going to have to slow down one way or another.
Right.
But a roundabout is self-regulating in that the lanes with high load take up more of the space, and whenever there's breaks in that load, then the low load lanes can fill the space for the most part.
I wonder if that's true. I mean, I hear what you're saying, because you could also think about it as like everyone's sort of getting a turn no matter. But that said, then when the low lanes run out, the big lanes can just keep running. So I'm not sure but it's a very good analogy, because also the cost of planning that is very low.
Right.
The implementation cost, well, I'm sure it's not low, because nothing
to
civic
do with public services.
But relative to all the sensing and signal lights and et cetera. And actually, funny enough, installing the sensor is kind of trying to install feedback, like a closed loop system.
Yeah.
But so you're trying to install a feedback loop. It's sort of like Industry 4.0 instead of just like,
right.
I wonder what the merits of a signal light are. I wonder if it's like better efficiency in terms of, because some cars don't need to stop, right? Like if you drive up and it's green, you're not stopping.
Sure.
So like a roundabout at the intersection of a huge highway, like a big arterial and a small street.
Sure.
Probably don't want every single car to, like, right? You probably want to give priority to.
Well, definitely.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, then how does that tie back to?
Well, the cars.
Production?
Not every car has to stop. First of all, if there's no traffic in the roundabout, you just slow down.
But let's say you have.
So that's the inherent cost, I guess.
100 cars per hour on one road and 1 car per hour on an intersecting road. Then having every one of those 100 cars slow down. Would probably be wasteful, efficient, like cost, energy. I'm just trying to think how that ties back into production. Like if there are scenarios where you have a really...
Well, if the alternative is a stoplight, it's going to go red sometimes one way or another.
Right.
So if it was pure sensor based and it only went red for the arterial when a car was on the other side, was on the crossroad.
Oh, you know what we're talking about?
Huh.
Kanban.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a fun one.
Yeah. Anyway, I just like noodling on it. The other part is that it effectively creates a roundabout creates more space for that interaction to happen in between the cars. Like more physical space.
Okay. And that's a good thing? Or?
I think it is a good thing because it allows room for like the meshing to happen in a way. It's sort of, is it creating a buffer? I don't know. How can we apply this to lean?
I don't know. Think about that.
But anyway, little aside.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one is kind of funny. I heard, we talked about this on the podcast, eat your own dog food. I heard a better phrase, which is eat your own cooking.
I feel like every time you say eat your own dog food, I puke a little in my mouth.
Yeah. Eat your own cooking is better also because you cooked the food, so you should try it.
True. Well, the example was a dog food company, right?
It was, but no one knows that when you just say that out of the blue.
You're like,
it's like, maybe don't eat your own dog food.
I'm going to pass. Thanks.
Yeah, no thanks on the dog food. But we we just built out like this whole task project management thing into Arda.
Yep.
Which doesn't violate Kanban, which is nice. It could be simpler. Like we definitely have some work to do on it.
Yeah.
The funny thing is like Kyle and I conceived of it together. We built it to, in line with our vision for how it should exist. And then the second I was like, all right, well, let me just use it at Austere. Instantly, I was like, okay, this is wrong. That's wrong. This other thing is wrong. I don't want to have to click 3 times for this thing. Like, it sort of was one of those things where it became necessary to take like 3 steps up in complexity to do the one tiny thing instead of, I think what's really cool about Kanban is the system is emergent from a lot of very small tasks. You can make one Kanban and you've improved your operations a little bit.
Right.
And then you add another Kanban and you've improved it even more. And suddenly by putting thousands into the system, like, right. Like the whole process emerges from that and you can start tweaking it. So that was terrible. Anyway, it was like just a lot of things. It was just so interesting because like, I thought as hard as I could, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It's not useful, which is why Toyota is like, go to the Gemba, like go do it, go see. There's no replacement for that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, I don't know, it's so tempting. We were just talking to a potential customer down in California, and they were kind of talking about, oh, well, maybe we solve it this way and maybe we solve it this way. And finally, Kyle was kind of like, I mean, we could sit here and prognosticate about how we'll do this, but honestly, I think the best option is just going to be we'll try it and we'll see what's wrong, and then we'll make adjustments because we're just not going to know. And probably all the ideas we have are not great.
Right.
Like, yeah. And it's so true.
Was that well received?
It was actually. Yeah.
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 Nice.
Yeah. I don't know.
I feel like anytime you can tell people that you don't know the answer in a sort of like commanding and authoritative way, it tends to go over pretty well.
Yeah. One of my favorite questions to ask when I'm buying a system from someone is, when would you recommend I go use something else?
Uh-huh.
And I just feel like if someone can't answer that question, you're just being sold.
Right.
Right. Because there is no one tool that fits all tools, right? Like,
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have some good example. I bought Lang, the guy who sold me the Lang system. I was like, okay, when would you recommend someone use Shunk? And he was like, if you need less than like, I forget what he said, 0.3 or 0.2 of repeatability.
Uh-huh.
I was like, great. I don't. Thank you. That's great. I'll buy your thing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting. Cool. As mentioned, been listening to Critical Chain the last week, which it's kind of cool to get my head back into theory of constraints a little bit. It's been, I don't know, probably a year since I read that. And a good portion of this last year has been not in depth thinking about systems in that way.
Okay.
Like we've done a lot of we've been focused in on specific aspects of our process, right?
Yeah.
Like our whole tooling thing, which was like A, still in process, and B, a big like get into the weeds, work on very small specific things, not thinking big picture about our larger constraints. So it's been cool to kind of get back into this like big picture thinking a little bit the last few weeks. And I wrote a note here that I'm not sure if it's still how I feel about the book. But Critical Chain is applying theory of constraints to project management.
Yeah.
Which I think often is overlooked in manufacturing scenarios, right? Like we focus on optimizing our repeating system for production, not on getting a project from A to Z and then it's done.
Right.
And there's a lot of overlap there, obviously, because repeating production is getting something from A to Z over and over and over again. But I think there's some kind of cool things to be taken from getting something from A to Z that's different every time. Like whatever, building a hospital, then building a school. Like
right.
A lot of overlap, but a lot different. And it did occur to me that it's very applicable to improvement projects, that I think we need to be sort of taking this mindset and getting a little more in-depth thinking about critical path planning for improvement projects, and like sort of taking theory of constraints to locate bottlenecks in our system, and then using critical path, critical chain thinking to figure out how to actually solve that in a way that doesn't just waste a ton of energy and time.
That has been high on my list. I think looking back at this year, the thing I did poorly was kind of, I'm always pretty gung-ho about like trying new things and improvements.
Yeah.
And I think was not hilariously, basically didn't take enough time up front to think through like, okay, this is what we're putting toward this. This is how much time we expect it to be.
Yeah.
Here's when we'll basically A3, right? Like,
right.
Here's when we'll know if this is worth moving forward.
It's almost like there's a pattern to follow here.
Yeah, totally. And so we wasted a lot of time and money, I think. And I think the flip side is I'd rather err on that side than
complacency.
not giving people like the time, including myself, like the time and resources to pursue improvements.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's better.
Yeah. But I think now we need to pursue it with the same energy, intensity, time, but maybe more focused and more of that time spent deciding where to put our time.
Yeah.
and then executing and finishing.
Yeah.
So
It's like we've said this before.
yeah.
But then I'm also thinking about how do we apply it to the actual projects in a job shop environment. I don't have any answers here, but just as I was walking in to record today, that's kind of what was on my mind of, I think, like, so for example, one thing that comes up in the book is buffer time, right? And how classically project management, or in big projects, buffer time gets used up at the beginning and then people cram at the end.
Right.
And thinking through my own process in our shop of producing parts to order, typically, right, like we're doing value add a handful of hours per project.
Yeah.
It's typically in our shop minimum of a week from receipt of order to delivery. And so I think obviously there is a lot of stack up of processes in our shop, but fundamentally we are still not doing work on a project till the very end, right before we have to deliver it in many cases. And so how do we flip that script to move our buffer time to the end, aside from just like being faster and getting caught up, which maybe is part of the answer with a mindset change. But I think there's more to it there. And I think all of us probably can use some thinking, can apply some of this conceptual thinking to lower lead times, give ourselves, be less hair on fire,
right?
You know, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think something else that sort of popped into my head as you're talking about theory of constraints and critical chain is Toyota's new mission is to produce cars one at a time, not single piece flow, but one at a time. And that's kind of what you're saying, right? So you have a bunch of stacked processes and it's easy to kind of, I think, unless I'm misunderstanding, and it's easy to lose sight of the fact. It's easy to get involved in the station or that operation and go like, how can we flow better through this? What are our buffers to protect this, et cetera?
Yeah. And
lose sight of the fact that the main focus from the customer's perspective is I give you my money.
Yes.
And I want a part.
I want my thing.
And I don't care how much uptime each station has because it's sitting in the buffer like the perfect amount of time or something.
Yeah.
And it's interesting thinking about, you know, the elimination of inventory as a driver for improvement. Similarly, like the pursuit of ongoing, seemingly impossible and kind of insane ideas.
Yeah.
Keeping you moving forward. Like you could totally see Toyota kind of resting on their laurels and being like, all right, we have a system that works. We have a bunch of buffers. We make a ton of cars and we're more profitable than the next largest automakers, 3 automakers combined.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's really thinking through my process. I'm kind of like, what are the things that we like in a critical chain sort of thinking? What are the legitimate things that we can't do until a customer gives us an order? And there's really only, just quickly thinking through it. Yeah. There's like 2 or 3, right? Like we can't program the part until they've given us final models. Yep. Which usually happens when they give us money. Mm-hmm. And we can't cut the part until it's programmed.
And aluminum has arrived.
Sure. But the aluminum has arrived part, that has nothing to do with the customer. Right? Like in theory, if we had like a magazine fed saw,
I see what you're saying. Yes.
Which my friend Nico was talking about the other day, and I was like, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
We've talked about it as well. But it's assuming we had all of our materials on hand.
Right.
And capacity on our machines. Yeah. It's like program, cut, pack, and ship. Yeah. And then if there's post-processing stuff, right? But
anodize or something.
Yeah. But taking that out of the picture for the moment, like it is theoretically possible if you had capacity and materials on hand at all time to do same day turnaround of like nearly any project. So why are we not doing that?
Right. That's super interesting.
And I think the answer is leveling, right? We as a shop like to have predictability, and we like to, it's nice to be able to tell for your people to come in tomorrow and know what they're going to be working on,
Right.
and not just twiddling their thumbs until an order arrives.
Right. Like a bell goes off and then everyone kicks in.
Jump. Right.
Yeah.
We're not going to like literally be like firefighters.
Right.
So that is part of it, but then I think that's not really it. Most of it is waste. And anyway.
And waiting. Yeah.
Waiting.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it also sort of makes you think about what is the true cost of not having stock on hand, right? Like you were sort of talking, like anodizing in-house, like you're not good at anodizing. Like I'm sure you're fine at anodizing, but in terms of like efficiency and you're set up to do it and, you know, your racking speed is good.
Whatever. Garbage.
Yeah. But the value of that is huge.
Yeah.
And I would imagine the same thing would be true on the stock. Yeah. Not going
I think
like,
it is.
I don't want to waste money and order stuff I'm not going to use.
Yeah. No, it's becoming clear that is maybe a direction we absolutely need to go in, at least for whatever, 80, if it covered 80% of our work.
Right. 80% of your work is like 20% of your, like, what would that be? Like stock sizes or?
Probably. You mean talking about
aluminum.
80-20?
Yeah, probably whatever.
It's somewhere in there. Really, it's just the limitation is that I haven't sat down and spreadsheeted it.
Yeah.
And like we've talked about, it's easy to be like, that won't work because of that 20% that doesn't fit. But if we could turn around 80% of our work in a week instead of 3 weeks, that'd be massive.
Yeah, and looking at it from the customer's perspective, when you're waiting, let's say a maximum of 5 days for the aluminum.
Yeah.
You could instead wait a maximum of, let's say, 5 additional hours of roughing. I don't know,
That's a worst case scenario, but sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So then now we're looking at like 5 days versus 5 hours.
Yeah.
And then suddenly roughing off a bunch of extra material doesn't seem crazy.
No.
And like turning an extra, $3 of aluminum per part into chips.
Yeah. For this type of work, I think if you start to get into production work, where high volume work, where the margins are slimmer, like it's a different
100%.
story. But yeah.
But also, if you do get those orders and it turns into a repeat job, you can optimize.
Right. Then you just do stock the stock because you do.
Yeah.
In this vein, sort of, we had a kind of a huge win the other day. Actually, last time I was here recording.
Yeah.
I left. They were packing up a bunch of parts. They were running a part on one machine. And I got back, and Will, who was packing up the parts, he was like, we found one that had a really bad defect. So Ariel made another one, and and then we're about to ship it.
Wow.
So it was like 2 hours or something. And the machine was already back on the first part from when I had left.
Uh-huh.
And it was like when everything was running quickly, it was like a 25-minute cycle time part.
Yeah.
So she like broke down, reset up, ran a part out, 3 operations, broke down and reset up, and was running the other part like in 2 hours. And very impressive. Very impressive for her. But also it's just like, I think we're really starting to see the fruits of our work on external setup and tool standardization.
That's so cool.
So huge win, but also like it's made it really clear now what the next hurdles are that we have to tackle for faster.
Care to share?
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this a bit, but I think what we need to tackle now, like if we're going from programming to like what the path is to a successful deliverable part, I think simulation is like really high on our list for things now.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of time spent in the shop watching a machine run through a first part.
And you're not going to run the machine as fast as you would run a simulation.
No.
Because you don't want to crash.
Well, and furthermore, like it's offline, right? It's externalizing
100%.
that.
Yeah.
It's faster and it's offline.
Right.
And there's no risk. Like you can run a simulation 40 times and it can be wrong 39 of those, and nothing bad has happened in the shop aside from wasted time.
And so do those simulations, like you're not looking just for crashes? Because I'd imagine like part of it is, does this cut sound good?
Right.
is the surface finish good?
Yeah, that is a whole other piece of it.
Okay.
I think critical is crashes, right?
For sure.
Crashes is like someone has to literally be standing here watching this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary is like things that are going to become a crash because a tool is cutting beyond its capability.
Yeah.
That you can usually hear, and you can handle with tool break detection and some other things like that. When it comes to actually like getting a good part off of the machine, for a lot of the work we're doing right now, it is outside of my capacity, I think, to systematize that right now to a point where we could reliably say this will be good.
Yeah.
So I think having someone walking it through and inspecting is still going to be critical.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one person can do 4 machines if they are not concerned about crashes.
Yeah.
Whereas right now, one person can kind of do 2 machines usually if they're having to pay closer attention.
Right.
Like if we're running repeat work, often one person will do like 3 repeat work jobs, proof out at one time while running a new one.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, that's pretty straightforward. There's a whole range, but that is highlighting itself as kind of the next step.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And so is that more software or just getting your machine simulation figured out in Fusion?
I think it's that.
Okay.
It's just getting the simulation actually set up, which
Yep.
I don't think is a big project. I just have not had a spare.
Add it to the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spare moment.
Totally.
But
interesting.
Anyway, it was a huge win and really cool to see how much clarity comes to the table once, not that we're done with setup optimization, but how clear the next bottleneck becomes.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. And actually that also is there, just to, you know, talk about a previous point.
Yeah.
Because you had no buffer, right? If there was extra inventory, then that changeover wouldn't have been necessary. And so that learning.
Oh yeah.
Right.
You mean
like,
the stock buffer? Yeah.
Like
if we hadn't had a bad part.
Yeah. Or you had a spare good part.
Yeah.
Then you'd be like, oh, ship this, no big deal.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Or just most people might just say like, we're going to ship them one short. We'll just charge them less.
Most shops, but
not our shop. It's not how we do it around here.
Yeah, you know, welcome to a new market. No,
you can get exactly the number you want. Actually, it is funny how often you see quotes that are plus or minus 5% or whatever.
Yeah, that is interesting. I totally understand why that is, but also like that would be a big no-no in TPS. Like a Kanban doesn't say plus or minus 5%.
Yeah, or like you don't get your car minus a headlight.
Right. Yeah. But I think what most people do is they assume they will have rejects, right? And so then they're overproducing a bit because they're going to have rejects. Mm-hmm. Which we do because we paint. Right. And how do you deal with that with anodize? Do you assume 0 rejects coming back from anodize?
Usually, yeah.
And is that usually true?
Usually, yeah. We very occasionally have to get reworked.
Stay tuned for us switching to anodize. Yeah. It is in the works.
Yeah, I mean, we have rejects for other reasons, but it's rare that it's the anodizer's fault.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Not the anodizer you're working with, but I think they are very good as well.
Yeah, I'm expecting some rejects. Also, we're kind of asking for a low price, I guess. I don't know.
Get what you pay for.
Well, not so much that, just, yeah, I guess a bit that. Like, I don't need them to, I would rather, I think, maybe I'm totally wrong about this. I think I would rather them not inspect every single thing.
Uh-huh.
Could be.
You mean 100%
Okay, here's
inspection?
why I'm saying that. 100, yeah. Like, yeah, exactly. We're sending them hundreds of parts. It's not like we're sending them 5 really expensive parts. And I think actually in saying that, the reason I'm saying that is because I assume, maybe incorrectly, that they are not taking those rejects and working them through a system of how do we make sure this doesn't happen again. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going to be paying for overtime improvement. Like the way Toyota structures their deals with suppliers is they agree on a rate and then they agree on a reduction in rate over time because they assume that their vendor is going to improve the process.
Yeah.
And then if the vendor, I forget how they structure it exactly, and I forget which book that's in.
That's in the Toyota way,
right?
Yeah.
Anyway. So let's see. Yeah, I guess something that I've been thinking a good bit about is like the difference between sort of system improvements, overarching, just like kind of boring stuff. If I was at the beginning of this,
yeah,
like, I mean, all of the stuff you've been talking about, it's like not specifically and of course this is the theory episode, but like not we 3D printed a new thingamajiggy that improves this tiny little thing. We used to have to hold it awkwardly. Now we hold it nicely. Like that's a win and that's awesome. But those overarching, just how does our company operate?
Yeah.
Such huge opportunities for improvement.
Right.
I feel like, and we've talked about this at length, but like, how do you see those, and do you need to reduce the noise of all the small annoying things to get there? Or is that just honing your ability to see that stuff? I don't really know. I feel like it's more the latter for me. Is like
I'm getting to the point where I feel like they're part and parcel.
Yeah, I think you just have to like keep flexing the muscle.
You sort of can't have one without the other. I mean,
yeah. And there is the whole like stop and fix of little things and make little improvements, and those do stack up over time. In fact, we modeled it and it's pretty insanely impactful.
Yeah.
And so maybe you are just making a lot more space for it in the company. I don't know. Anyway, I will say over time, the little things, while fun, are just so much less sexy than the like big systemization, optimization thing. So we were talking to one company, one of the ladies there who's I think going to be running ARDA, kind of turned to her boss. Like we're sort of talking, we're talking through some of how they'd implement, etc., and like how much we're charging and a bunch of, and he was kind of like, I don't know. She's like, well, just think about like every time you run to the store because we need some part, not only is it your time of going to the store and then coming back, but now you have an hour of being gone and there's tons of people who are going to walk around looking for you. And it's like, yeah, right. That and instead of doing the thing they're meant to be doing, they're like walking around looking for you. And that's such a small thing that so many people say like stuff like, oh, it's not a big deal. We just run to the hardware store. Like literally a bunch of people. And it's like, that is a big deal. That's a huge deal. In fact, it's such a waste of time. And I think there's including myself, there's a lack of, I was thinking about your improvement from last episode of the carts and making your buffers visual. We know that that's a good idea. Over and over, we've read it in a book. Have I done it? No. Right? And like it took you years to do it.
Yeah.
And because it feels like this tiny little thing and it's not a big deal. And I know it theoretically, but like nailing the basics, I think is like really underrated. Right? Like, I mean, you and I didn't get into this because of system design. I mean, I think we're both interested. I mean, obviously now we're both interested, but
sure. Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, this machine is insane and I get to own one. That's so cool. Right. And now I'm making cool parts and like, yeah, I don't know. But like nailing the basics is, I think, very underrated. And like, there's just such huge time savings to unlock and like, and then that unlocks everything else. Like, having more time to make other improvements and and developing new products, being more available for customers to, I don't know, work with them on things they're struggling. I don't know, all good things. But I just feel like it gets overlooked in my shop and in so many shops we're talking to.
Yeah. And like using up your buffer at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's easy. You're like on a project and you've got 2 weeks to finish it. And it's day 2.
Right.
On day 2, like going to the hardware store doesn't seem like a big deal.
That's so true.
And you're using up this time that's critical. On day 13 of 2 weeks, when the project's not done, going to the hardware store is like crap. This is the worst time in the world to go to the hardware store.
Even though it's exactly the same.
It's identical.
Yeah. That's funny.
We just tend to not think about things that way.
Yeah.
Especially if there's enough slack in the system that, like if you've designed a system decently well, that your hair's not always on fire, it's really easy to be like, it's just going to the hardware store, whatever. Not a big deal. Right.
And it's kind of nice because you get a break from all the stress of work.
Yeah. But it's still wasteful.
Right.
Yeah.
Hugely wasteful.
Yeah.
I was we toured a van retrofitter. And this is the only place I've seen this, which I thought, actually, now that you're saying this, on the side of every van, they printed out some paperwork, which we've seen in a few shops. What they had was I forget if they had 3 days of buffer, and they had this big one whole page that was just for like 3 blocks. And if they used one up, they would color it in.
Oh.
And so just at a glance, you can see sort of like essentially the buffer on that project and when it's getting used up, which I thought was kind of cool and made it really visual.
How did they do that? Was it like a comparison to where they were supposed to be at that point in the project?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I know that they allocate different amounts of time for different tasks.
Yeah.
Like putting in the plumbing is going to be half a day or something like that.
Yeah.
And so suddenly if you're, I don't know, right? Like suddenly if you're meant to do plumbing before lunch and you're not done, maybe you go fill in like, I used up half a day of buffer.
Interesting.
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Huh.
Yeah.
That seems like one of the huge challenges, right? In tracking that.
100%.
Yeah.
The really cool part is on day 2, running to the hardware store suddenly has exactly the same impact as on day 10. And so that part's interesting.
Yeah. Even if it was a gut sense of like how much of your buffer
I'm going to have to go color that in.
Yeah.
And I'll not run to the I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of running along here. Couple little things I wanted to hit on. One was just a super brief, I think I mentioned that we like moved our Kamishibai review and 3S to the end of our standard morning meeting. And I just wanted to like report back that's been super impactful and very effective.
Very cool.
So to anyone struggling with that or just wanting to implement it for the first time, give it a shot.
And so you run your morning meeting, and then at the end of it, you're looking at the Kamishibai board to assign tasks to people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't remember, is this in one of my... part of what we've started doing is actually us picking. We're not assigning. We're letting people pick a task.
Okay.
But it was this weird, awkward, like, we just kind of stared at it. And we were like, okay, all this stuff needs to be done.
Great. Got it.
What next?
Is that like no ownership? Or what is it?
Yeah.
Dual ownership is no ownership?
From, precisely. From Seating
Matters. Yeah.
So we're each picking a thing. Not like that's the only thing you might do that day. And then you can, if you want, you can roll that into your 3S. Like you can do that task as part of your 3S.
Oh, cool.
Or if you have something else in mind, you go do whatever for your 3S and catch that task sometime later in the day.
And are you guys successfully keeping the machines idle during that time? Or is there kind of like 3S, but also I'm getting stuff running?
Depends on the day.
And I don't mean successful like that's the goal, but I don't know.
For the most part, I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
today, no, because we are a hard deadline day. But we did things like, definitely slow down a little bit. And I mean, I'd like there to be a point where like the machines could still run, but it sort of depends on what the work in the shop is. Sometimes that's like A-okay.
Yeah. I think what I struggled with, because in an ideal world, everything would get running and then you'd like 3S and stuff.
Yeah.
I think what I had trouble with is the second you're sort of in that production flow.
Yeah.
then a machine stops and you're like, oh, well, let me just go refill it and hit go again.
Oh,
right.
Yeah,
and
we don't really do that. But our 3S is also short. We're only trying to do 15 minutes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can always run long if you're working on something
Right.
you're excited about.
Right.
And it has, for me, at least a few times. But
Interesting.
yeah. So that was one thing I wanted to touch on really quick. Another brief thing was just like thinking about just always coming back to the power of standardization and how often the difference between something just working or not working without intervention is due to something very, very minor.
Okay.
The example in my shop is like very in the weeds, nitty gritty, like most people wouldn't understand. So I was trying to think of like a cooking example that would be like widely applicable. And one might be like, say you have a standard recipe for muffins that you do every single day and it calls for flour, as muffins probably do.
Yep.
If you have buckwheat flour instead of whatever, unbleached white, that recipe doesn't work. And if you step back from being completely familiar with a kitchen and thinking of unbleached white and buckwheat flour as like totally different things, but just think of them as flour, as we do for many things in our businesses, right? Like Sharpie versus dry erase marker or whatever, right? Like that's just both pen.
Yeah.
We're very like attuned to the fact that they're different things, but someone who's maybe not, if you were to like write out instructions, for example, use a pen to do task A, but you don't specify Sharpie or dry erase, you'll get very different results. Similar to the muffins, you'll get very different results. And I think I just keep coming back to like how powerful standardization is when you're like, maybe we only have Sharpies in the shop, or we're really good about documenting when you need a Sharpie, or we have Arta, and so we always have unbleached white flour in our house, whatever the case may be. It just struck me as absolutely critical. We have now 3 different mills in our shop that all require very slightly different code to run a program that is otherwise identical. To the point where like you don't have to go reprogram the part, but it's the difference between for a repeat job, let's say, it's the difference between an order being placed and never touching a programmer's desk, to an order being placed and requiring intervention, reposting, making notes, alerting the shop floor that there's now 2 versions or 3 versions, as the case may be.
Tracking those versions, which one is right. Probably doing a prove out because it is net new.
Potentially.
And here's the thing that, like, I don't know, is a bit of an unlock for me often with these things. If you actually count up that time and then create a budget, it gives you a lot of money to solve the problem. Right. And like we just had that with when we do these installs, we're of Arta, we're printing off whatever 200 to 500 cards and laminating them. And then we were like, man, laminating is a bummer. And then I was like, wait, how much of a bummer? How much time is it taking us? Okay, here is our budget for solving this problem per card. And it's a lot. And so suddenly if you're paying like $1 per card for the paper stock, it's like, that's fine. Right. Instead of being like, man, well, an index card only cost me 8 cents. Right. And it's like, it costs you a lot more. That's cool.
Nice.
I will kick some of these things to next episode, I feel like.
Cool.
And thanks all for listening. Always fun. You can find me at austeremanufacturing.com and austere_manufacturing on Instagram. You can also find me at arta.cards on the internet and also on Instagram.
You can find me at lichen_MFG on Instagram, lichenprecision.com on the internet. We have a Patreon. Go hit it up. And incremental CI on Instagram for the pod. We will talk to you soon.